Well, today we're going to be wrapping up this series that we've been in over the last several weeks called The Paradox of Generosity. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about the very thing that I think you love to talk about in church, money and generosity. Is that true? You're like, yes, this morning I was like, Buck, please talk about money and go way overtime. That would be awesome, right? Anyone? No. Anyways, I totally get that, guys. I know that when it comes to money, when it comes to church, there are tensions, and I think those are fair. I think if I heard your story, I'd be like, yeah, I totally get it. But here's the thing I want you to think about, and I was thinking about that, this week, just trying to think about the tensions of money in church and the whole thing, is that this conversation with money and generosity, this conversation's been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Pretty much with, any kind of religious leader or any kind of philosophy you can pick. I mean, we've been talking about money and generosity for a long time. In fact, just think about this. There's a Hindu proverb that was written 3,000 years ago. That's 1,000 years before Jesus, and here's what the Hindu proverb says. It says, they who give have all things. They who withhold have nothing. If you read that, you're like, really? You mean, it's a little bit of a conundrum. Like, if I give, like there's something for me. If I withhold, I have nothing. That feels a little bit contradictory. And then you think about, 3,000 years ago, there was also another individual. His name was Solomon. Solomon was King David's son, and from a biblical perspective, Solomon was the wisest man ever to live outside of Jesus, and Solomon is the richest man in human history, trillions of dollars if you looked at his net worth in his time. And Solomon leans into this conversation. Solomon says, one man gives freely yet gains even more, another withholds unduly but ends up impoverished. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. So Solomon says, man, I'm just telling you with ancient wisdom, here's this idea. Like, the more you open this, it refreshes you, the more generous you are. Which you're like, I thought I'm refreshing the people I'm being generous to. What does this have to do with me? And then you fast forward about 500 years, after Solomon, about 500 years before Jesus, and there's a Chinese philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu says this, the wise man does not lay up his own treasures. The more he gives to others, the more he has for his own. Really? The more I give here, the more I actually have here? Yeah. And then around this same time in history was the Buddha. The Buddha says this when it comes to money. He says, giving brings happiness in every state of its expression. That the more generous you are, the more you open the door to generosity, the more ways you find to be generous, you actually invite happiness into your life. That's what the Buddha says. And then fast forward another 500 years in history, and Jesus shows up on the scene. And what Jesus says is this, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Meaning the more I give, the blessings here, than to hold on, like the blessings aren't here, the blessings are actually here. Yeah. And then the Apostle Paul takes Jesus' teachings, and the Apostle Paul was a follower of Jesus. He contextualizes them to our lives, and for 2,000 years, we've had these documents that are in the Bible that talk about his view on generosity and money. And here's what the Apostle Paul says. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. It's just amazing. I mean, pick whatever religion you want to. Pick whatever kind of ancient philosophy you want to. And at the end of the day, the consistency in what they have to say about money and generosity, you see this just theme over and over and over through history. Yeah, that the more that you give, the more generous you're intentionally, the more generous you are, it actually benefits you. And you hear that. Maybe you're here today, or maybe you're watching or listening, or hanging out in your living room, or eating Cheerios at the table, whatever it may be. And you hear that, and you may go, well, that's sweet, Buck, and that's great for historians and philosophers and religions and all that stuff. But today we live in the idea of intellectualism. Today we have this empirical science. We have objectivity. There's something concrete. So I want to know what science has to say about what the philosophers have said. And what's so cool is in the question, does science line up with what ancient philosophy has said or the ancients have said? And we know that. In fact, throughout this whole series, we've been looking at this study called the Science of Generosity Initiative. It's one of the largest studies ever done on just generosity. And it's done by Christian Smith and Hilary Davidson. Both of those individuals are sociologists. And throughout the series, I've said, hey, do your own research. I want you to go fact check everything I'm saying, like push on it and go look, because this is fascinating what the science actually has to say about generosity. And Hilary and Christian, they went out and they just said, hey, we want to, make these observations about individuals and couples and families. And they followed these individuals, couples, and families for over 5 years. And they just made observations about generosity. And not just anecdotal generosity, not fake generosity, but somebody who said, hey, okay, if there's something to benefit me, I'm going to truly find a reason to be generous. There it is. And I'm going to continually and consistently be generous. And they made the observations. And they put all of their research about generosity in a book. And the book is called The Paradox of Generosity, and we've been looking at it. And what's so wild is they put the paradox on the front of the book. And the paradox is giving, we receive, grasping, we lose. Well, that seems to be very consistent with what the ancients have said for thousands of years, and now science says it. In fact, the conclusion of the whole book is right here. He said, if Americans want to become happier, healthier people who live with greater purpose, suffer less depression, and enjoy more personal growth, look at this, it says one way they might better accomplish that is to learn to be more generous. There's a whole lot of things that impact your happiness and hope for the future and purpose and meaning in life and personal growth, of course. But according to the research and according to the science, which is objective, one of the primary pillars, one of the central guardrails, one of the central foundational things is, what are you doing with your money? How are you being generous or not being generous? Because to the degree of your generosity, you actually open the door to the very things I think we all desire in life. In fact, I just want you to think about that. You know, their research says, here's the things that we're given: happy, health, greater purpose, suffer less depression, personal growth. I think regardless if you're a Christian or not, I think the decisions you make in life and the sacrifices you make in life and the longings you have in life are for those very things, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not. That you ultimately want to go, hey, I just want to be happy in life. I want my kids to be happy. I want my family to be happy. I want my relationships to be happy. I mean, I want to wake up every day with my life knowing I have purpose, not because of some religious kind of shenanigans that I put a little thing on my, mirror and I wake up and I have purpose. No, I want to know it objectively in my life, that I have real purpose and meaning. I want to have hope for the future. And I want to look back on my life, 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road and go, man, I've grown to a place that I love the direction of my life. I think regardless, if you're a Christian or not, every single one of us go, that's what I desire in life. And the ancients and science all conclude the same thing. One of the major pillars that allows those realities to be wider and wider in your life is generosity. So, that's why we're doing this series, because I want all of us to experience this. And so in week 1, we talked about the whole paradox of generosity, because it truly is an intellectual paradox. It's really like if I give money over here, I have less in my bank account, and it's given for the benefit of these people, but somehow it's going to benefit me more than it benefits what my generosity is going towards. And that is a conundrum. It's hard to wrap our minds around. That's why it's called a paradox. And we looked at that paradox and unpacked the paradox and talked about investment versus just giving. And if you weren't here in week 1, I really want to encourage you to go listen to what we've said. And then in week 2, we talked about the number one thing that prevents us from being generous. Of all the things we could pick, the number one obstacle to our generosity is fear. And fear sounds like, what if? What about? What if the economy? What if I lose my job? What if there's a health crisis? What if I don't have enough? What if my kids? What if? And that's legit. Those are real things. And we talked about that in week 2. And again, if you weren't here last week, I want you to go listen and watch what we've said. Now today, what I want to do is I want to talk about how in the world can you and I, all of us, regardless if you're a Christian or not, take a step and put yourself in a better posture to be more and more generous. Now, you may hear that, and there may be a pushback, and I want to address that pushback. I actually addressed it in week 1, but I want to say it again because I do think it's important. Oftentimes when you hear a preacher get up and they say, I want you to be more and more generous, you're like, that's when I turn you off. That's when I'm done. Okay, I'm going to check out, think about golf, think about football, whatever it is, right? Because you're like, the reason I don't like money in church and generosity in church is because all you want me to do is give more and more money to the church. And that's a pushback. And so I thought about that. And I said this in week 1. And I said, well, I'll just be honest with you guys. The truth is, that's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to give more money to our vision and mission as a church. And of course I would. Because guys, I get a front row seat to see what your generosity actually does in real people's lives. I mean, you got a little glimpse of it. Today we watched Savannah's story, incredible story. Yesterday, you may not know this, but yesterday we baptized 9 children in a pool, which is kind of cool. It was a heated pool, which is nice, but 9 children. So in the last 2 days, 10 people have been baptized. Those are real people. Those are real stories. And they're finding real hope. And part of that is certainly God's grace and what God's doing, but part of that is your generosity. I get a front row seat to that. I mean, I get to see coming alongside of so many of the next generation with little kids and our students. And if you know their stories and you knew about their mom being in rehab and their grandmas bring them here to Northpoint, and this is their one place of hope. This is their one place to somebody who genuinely cares for their lives, and you hear their background and the stories and you're going, wow, there's hope and there's purpose and there's meaning and there's a way forward. And that's a result of God's grace and your willingness to be generous. You hear those stories and you're like, dang, that's making a difference in people's lives. When we get to come alongside of single moms and single dads and help them with medical bills or help them pay, their rent or their mortgage, to just get them back on their feet, when we tangibly put clothes on the backs of children around the world, I see that. And so when I say, I want you to give and be more generous to Northpoint, there's a reason behind that, and that's legit. And I want you to, because it leads to life change. But if you go, well, Buck, that's my issue. You just affirmed the reason why I'm turning you down. If that's where you're at, then as I said in week 1, please do not give it to Northpoint. Give somewhere else, but for goodness sakes, be generous. Because the ancients and the science of the 21st century all conclude that your generosity, the more generous you can intentionally be, you open the door wider and wider and wider to the very things we long for in life. So today, with that said, I want to talk about how in the world do we all get in a posture, again, regardless if you're a Christian or not, all get in a posture to become more generous, because I want you to experience what science says. So to do that, I want us to look at what Jesus has to say in Matthew 24 and 25. And what's really cool, Jesus actually gives us a really cool insight on what to do, how to take a very practical, tangible step, and to be more generous in all of our lives. But I also have to say, Matthew 24 and 25, these 2 chapters are kind of a chapter and a half. They are kind of like those chapters that Jesus does and says what only Jesus can do and say. And let me explain what I mean. If you believe that Jesus really is the Son of the living God, if you believe that, and if you believe that Jesus is the promised Messiah, if you believe Jesus is the one who came from heaven, as he claimed, he said, I've come from heaven. If you believe Jesus is the author of life, in other words, from the very beginning, he knit you together in your mother's womb, he designed all of this. And if you believe Jesus really is the one who sits at the right hand of God and prepares a place for you in the life to come after this life, then there are only things that Jesus could say with those credentials. There's very distinct things Jesus leans in and says that only Jesus can say. And in Matthew 24 and 25, this is one of those moments that Jesus kind of leans in. And here's what he says. In summary, if I had to summarize both chapters, be ready. Be ready. Like, be intentional. Be purposeful. Live your lives with wisdom. Be ready, be ready, be ready. Why? Jesus, why are you telling us to be ready? He says, and here's what only Jesus can say. Because I'm coming back. I promise. I am coming back. Yes, I go and sit at the right hand of my Father to prepare a place for you, but my promise to you, and you don't know the date or time, but I promise you, I'm coming back. See, that's something only Jesus can say. And I'm coming back, and if I don't come back in your lifetime, well, then you're going to come see me, and I'm going to see you. But at the end of the day, be ready, because I'm coming back. Now, something you may not know is if you've grown up in church, or maybe you haven't grown up in church, you're familiar with something called communion. Communion's where you take the bread and you take the wine and you remember what Jesus has done for you. I mean, communion's all about this idea, remember, remember, remember. Don't forget the sacrifice that Jesus made for you so you could be liberated, you could be forgiven, and you could have peace with God in your eternity. It could be secure. It's really important to remember. But did you also know that communion, there's a third thing we're called to remember? The Apostle Paul gives it to us. Here's what he says. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, that's communion, remembering the sacrifice of Jesus, you proclaim, look at this, the Lord's death until he comes. Don't ever forget. His body was broken for you. His blood was spilled so you could have peace and be forgiven with God. But also never forget, he promised he's coming back. He's coming back. And every time you take communion, that's one of the things you're to remember, that he's coming back. So Jesus says, guys, I'm coming back, so be ready. Be ready. And in Matthew 24 and 25, he talks about lots of different areas. He talks about what's going on in our hearts and minds, be ready there. He talks about our faithfulness and obedience, be ready there. And he also talks about money and generosity. It's such a big part of our lives. And he says, I want you to be ready there as well. And look at what he says. This is so insightful. He starts this way. Again, Jesus starts in only the way that Jesus can start. He says, again, heaven's kingdom is like. And anytime Jesus starts to go, the kingdom of God or heaven's kingdom's like, it's this future idea. It's this idea to go, hey guys, I have come from heaven. I know what God's like. I know what heaven's like. And part of Jesus' role was to come into this world because God loves you and God loves me, so he sent his one and only son. And part of Jesus' role was to explain God. To go, hey, this is what God is like. This is how you can relate to him, and this is how he relates to you. And it's in this context of like future tense. And this idea of the kingdom of heaven is also to say, and this is how God's going to evaluate you. I just want you to know. I want you to be ready. This is how you can relate to God. This is how God relates to you. And this is how God's going to evaluate you. So be ready. Well, what do you mean, Jesus? What's this whole evaluation like? Well, let me tell you. Let me explain it in a story. Again, heaven's kingdom is like a wealthy man who went on a long journey and summoned all of his trusted servants and assigned his financial management over to them. And it continues. Before he left on this journey, he entrusted a bag of 5,000 gold coins to one of his servants, to another a bag of 2,000 gold coins, and to the third a bag of 1,000 gold coins. And then he says, each according to his ability to manage. Now, this is so incredibly insightful, what Jesus says here. And one of the things that's important to understand is a bag of this money is about a year's wages. So this is tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars, even for the one servant who got one bag. And what Jesus is explaining here is he's saying, hey, listen, here's this, there's this master. He has all this money, and he has these money managers. He's got these guys that he entrusts. And that are good guys, that are responsible, that he looks at and he says, okay, based on your abilities and kind of where you're at, I'm going to give 5, I'm going to give 2, I'm going to give 1. And that makes sense because if you have a 5-year-old, a 25-year-old, and a 55-year-old, you're going to give each according to their ability. This is all that's going on. So the master looks at it, these servants and says, hey, I see you, kiddo. Man, you're responsible, you're trustworthy, I believe in you. Here you go, this is mine. I'm going to entrust it to you. Be responsible because I'm going on this long journey, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to hold you accountable for what you've done. So I thought about that. I thought, okay, what would be maybe a modern day example? And this example works for me. It may not work for you, but this is my best shot. So I was thinking about this. Imagine a dad, right? Your dad. And your dad's into these classic cars. And he loves, the 67 Ford Mustang. And he's like, oh, man, that's my car. And he's been working for 10, 20, 30 years and putting a little money, restoring. And now he finally has his restored 67 Mustang Eleanor right here. Look at that baby. 500 horses under the hood. I mean, it is all souped up, modified. That thing is awesome. And it's probably a couple $100,000 in this kind of condition. I mean, just amazing. And imagine your dad comes up to you and says, hey, I've been watching you. I see you. You're responsible. And I also know that you have a heavy foot and you like to go fast. Your favorite movies, Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby. And so I know that about you, but here's the deal. I'm going to go on this business trip. I'm going to be gone, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months. It just depends on how the business activities happen, So I'm not really sure when I'm going to be back, but I'm going to come back. And my car, it belongs to me, but I see you, and you're my son. And I see you're responsible. I see you like to have fun, but I also see you're responsible. So here's the deal. Here's my keys. I want you to take it. I want you to have fun. And, if you do some donuts, just make sure you're in a safe place that you do donuts. If you go fast, because I know you like Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last, Have fun. Enjoy. But drive it the way I would. Be responsible with all the things you have like I would. I'm your father. You know exactly what I've asked you to do. And I don't know when I'm coming back, but when I come back, I expect you to hand these keys back to me, and you're going to be responsible for that 67 Ford Mustang, Eleanor. Jesus says to you and to me, guys, when it comes to money, don't ever forget, man, money is powerful. It really is, and we've talked about it. But when it comes to money, he's teaching us. He's saying, listen, it's not yours. It's God's. Don't think your money is yours, really? And if you push on that and go, no, I mean, Buck, look at me. I would just say, God gave you your intellect. God gave you your brain. God knit you together in your mother's womb. He gave you your hands. He gave you your talents. He allowed you to be born in the times and seasons you were born in. In all of human history, we're just a tiny little blip. And God says, man, I allowed you to be born in that time and that place. And yes, you're responsible. And as a result of your responsibilities, you have wealth. Wonderful. But remember, it's mine. It's not yours. And because it's mine and it's not yours, you're managers. You're not owners. Don't walk around and live your lives with your money like it's yours. Like it's all mine. It belongs to me. I mean, imagine that. Imagine if you went to like Edward Jones or whatever kind of financial institution, you gave him here's the money. And that money manager's like, I'm going to turn your account off. You can't log in. I'm going to change your account numbers. And they start buying all this stuff. And you're like, what are you doing? That's my money. I mean, it'd be crazy. It'd be ludicrous. It's God's money. It's not yours. We're to be stewards, not owners. Because ultimately, Jesus, he's for you. He's for me. Says, you will be accountable. I promise you, I'm coming back. And if not in your lifetime, you're going to come see me, and I'm going to see you. I want you to be ready, be ready, be ready. So let me tell you a story. This money manager, he's got 3 servants, gives them all a bunch of money according to their abilities. As a money manager, hey, you invest well, you do well. Take some of the proceeds, enjoy. Enjoy the things that I've entrusted to you, but be responsible. Act how I would act. Know what I would ask you to do, because you're going to be accountable. And he plays the story out with that in mind. He says, the one entrusted with 5,000 gold coins immediately went out, traded with the money, and he doubled his investment, which is awesome. Did exactly what the master asked him to do, was trustworthy. In the same way, the one who was entrusted with 2,000 gold coins traded with the sum and likewise doubled his investment. Just took it and all the training, what the master said to do, did that. Enjoyed the prosperity, enjoyed some of the things for their own benefit, but ultimately was like, okay, this is how he would do it. This is what he asked me to do. It's not my money. I'm going to be prepared. But then there's one more. What happened with the one? Well, Jesus tells us, but the one who had been entrusted with 1,000 gold coins, that's a year's wages approximately, dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. His master never told him to do that. That was not part of the training at all. That was not part of the expectations. That is the opposite of being responsible. You did nothing. You just buried it and grasped your hands. Okay, what happened? Well, Jesus tells us. The story continues. After much time had passed, the master returned and settled accounts with his servants. I promise you. I told you I was coming back. Not in your timeline. In fact, in the Greek, the time lapse is about a lifetime. So it's in about a lifetime. Took tens and tens and tens of years. Comes back, settles accounts. And so now they're responsible. And here's what happens. The one who was entrusted with 5,000 gold coins came and brought 10,000, saying, see, I have doubled your money. Look at this. It's awesome. Commending his servant, the master replied, look at that. He says, you have done well and proven yourself to be loyal and trustworthy servant. Your palms were open. You trusted me, kiddo. Way to go, because you have been faithful stewards to manage a small sum. Look at this. Now I'm going to give you some more. Now I'm going to put you in charge of much more. And then look at what it says. It says, you will experience the delight of your master, who will say to you, enter into the joy synonymous with happiness of your Lord. Then the one who had been entrusted 2,000 gold coins came in and said, very similar story. See, my master, I've doubled what you've entrusted to me. Commending his servant, the master replied, you have done well and proven yourself to be my loyal and trustworthy servant. And then it says, because you have been faithful to manage a small sum, now I'm going to put you in charge of much more. You will experience the delight of your master, who will say to you, enter into the joy of the Lord. Now, here's what I want you to see. The ancients have spoken. Science has spoken. Jesus says, man, I'm just telling you, you trust me, kiddo. I know it's going to require you to trust. You go palms up, invest. I'm telling you, there is far more here than the benefit of your generosity. The first two go, but there's three. What about the one? What's up with the guy who dug a hole and buried it? Well, we know. Look at this. The one who had been entrusted with 1,000 gold coins came to his master and said, and this is something I'll share with you, I do all the time. Look, sir, I know that you're a hard man to please. And then he says, and you are a shrewd and worthless businessman who grows rich on the backs of others. Blame, your fault, not mine. I was afraid of you. So I went and hid your money because of my fear and buried it in the ground. But here it is. Take it. It's yours. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm caught, when I'm busted, when I know, my insecurities have gotten me and I didn't tell the whole truth, or, fear's gotten the best of me and I was a little bit too aggressive over here, and now I know I'm going to be accountable. I don't know about you, but one of the things that I am tempted to do is when I'm driving my car, have a personal conversation with just me. And I start to build my case against the one I'm going to be accountable to. And I start to, think, well, they did this, and there's what they did, and my fears or insecurities drive my emotion. My emotion drives my perception, and before long, I'm playing one heck of a blame game. And it is all their fault, and if they would have just, if he would have just, if Jill would have just, if my boys would have just, if my friend would have just, and man, I just set them up, and I talk myself into it. So next time, if you see me in my car, and I'm talking to myself, just honk your horn. I got to get out of that. That's not healthy, right? But that's what this servant is doing. His master is not shrewd like this. The other two knew exactly who the master was. This individual servant is playing the blame game. I don't want to be responsible, so it's your fault. But the master saw his fear, which drove his emotion and drove his perception. But he also saw greed. And this is something perhaps you haven't seen before in this passage. Let me show it. Here's what the master replies. But his master said to him, you are an untrustworthy and lazy servant. If you knew I was shrewd and ruthless, okay, I'm going to follow your logic, but I'm about to call you on your greed. If you knew I was shrewd and ruthless businessman who always makes a profit, why didn't you deposit my money, it's not yours, mine, in the bank? And then look at this. Then I would have received it all back with interest when I returned. Now, what everybody in the audience knew in the first century context, they knew the banking systems. And they understood that in the first century, when you went to deposit a large sum of money that was going to make interest, you had to declare the owner. You had to write down the owner. And at this moment, this servant would have had to declare, it's not mine, it's his. But the master said, I'm going to be gone a long time, not sure when I'm going to get back. And the servant, in fear, said, what if, buried it, and then in fear blamed him, and then in greed said, man, if I bury it and I don't document the money, if my master has a shipwreck, if there's some tragic thing, then all of the money, it's mine. And I can do what I want to do. The master called him on it, said, hey, I see exactly what's going on. You are accountable. And then it wraps up. But because you were unfaithful, I will take the 1,000 gold coins and give them to the one who has 10,000. They will have more. And then Jesus, in summary, says, for the one who has will be given more until he overflows with abundance. There's the paradox again we see. And the paradox continues. And the one who, with hardly anything, even what little he has, will be taken from him. Jesus, what do you want us to know here? What are you getting at? Well, remember, Matthew 24 and 25, this is Jesus going, be ready, be ready, be ready. Kiddo, I'm for you. I'm about to give my life to die on a Roman cross. You don't have to question if this is for you or not for you. I'm saying be ready because I want you to experience something greater. I'm saying be ready because I'm for you and I want you to be prepared. Jesus, how can I be ready when it comes to money and generosity? Well, let me kind of give you some guardrails. Let me give you some insight to help you with that. When it comes to money, it's not yours. It's God's. Never forget that. Just like the father with the 67 Mustang, it belonged to Dad. It didn't belong to you, but Dad entrusted it to you because you are trustworthy. But it's not yours. It's Dad's. It's God's. Secondly, when it comes to money, you're managers, not owners. Don't function and act like it's all mine. You're just a money manager, a steward. In our 70, 80, 90, 100 years, just so fast, we're stewards with what God entrusted us in this time period in human history. And ultimately, Jesus says, keep in mind, not only those two things, but you're going to be accountable. You're going to be accountable. And I want you on that day. Either if I come back in your lifetime and you see my promise fulfilled in your lifetime, or if it doesn't happen in your lifetime and you come and see me in the life after this one, I want you to be ready. I want you to be expectant. I want you to go, hey, man, I enjoyed it, but I was responsible. I did what you asked me to do. Faithful. So, what does this look like in our practical lives? How can you and I take what Jesus is saying and go, okay, well, how do we get in a better posture of being generous with what Jesus taught in Matthew 24 and 25? Well, here's something practically I would say, and this would be for every single one of us, regardless if you're a Christian or not. I think there are three things we can all do. Number one, I would say follow it. Follow it. If we're going to take a step and become more and more generous, which opens the door to what science says is beneficial to us, we first must follow it and ask the question, where's it going? Like, I'm saying every penny, every single penny, I don't care if you have millions or if you have $5, every single penny, where's it going? And we live in such a cool age of technology. There's all kinds of apps. There's all kinds of spreadsheets. There's all kinds of Google Docs. There's all kinds of creative ways to know where every single penny, not one is unaccounted for, is going. You should know that. And when it comes to a budget, I'm not talking about a budget. A budget is, hey, next month, here's how much I think I'm going to spend. I'm talking about something more dynamic than that. Because there's things that come up. There's sideways things that come up in life. It needs to be far more dynamic to go, okay, well, this came up and that came up, so here's every single penny that was spent this month. You need to know that. And this is not one of those Amex moments, you know, where Amex says, here's my selling point. You'll know where all your money's going. This is not about you knowing how to know where your money's going. This is about you know. You know. I know where every cent is going. First and foremost, you need to follow it and know where it's going. Secondly, to put yourself in a better posture financially is to observe it. What do I see? Now that you see every single penny and how it's being spent, there's really no questions about it. It's very objective. They go, oh, okay. Well, that's what I'm spending on living expenses. That's my mortgage, you know. That's my, ooh, goodness, look at that electric bill. You know, that's my food budget. That's how much I'm spending at H-E-B. You know, that's how much I'm spending on all my hobbies and all these, you know, activities and all these gadgets, gizmos like I like. And you'll also have awareness on how much you're spending at Chewy's with jalapeno ranch. You're like, there's my jalapeno ranch budget, right there. Or maybe that's just me. And I joke about it all the time, and you're like, Buck, come up with a new joke. I really don't have one. That's all I got. Because I eat there all the time, and I really like jalapeno ranch. But I mean, the point being, you should know that. It should be like, okay, here we go, Chewy's again. You know, here's how much I've spent on entertainment, food, and Chewy's jalapeno ranch. And you also should know, and here's how much I've been generous with. And throughout the series, I think one of the things we get into, and I want you to be careful about this, don't jump into the extreme lanes. I don't think I've been extreme on what we've been talking about. I've tried to be very fair with the conversation. The extremes keep us from doing what's wise. So yes, be responsible, work hard, make good money. Yes, be responsible, save money. That's really important. But equally so, the science and the ancients have all told us, yes, be generous. You need to know. Follow it. Observe it. What do you see concretely, objectively? And then adjust it. How can I be more generous? How can I take a step to be more generous individually, as a family, as a couple? Why? Well, if you're a follower of Jesus, I shouldn't have to lean very hard into this. But as a follower of Jesus, the why is what Jesus taught us. It's not yours. It's his. We're stewards, not owners. We will be accountable. As a follower of Jesus, that's the why. But for all of us, regardless if you're a follower of Jesus or not, why do we need to adjust it? Why do we need to find more creative ways to be more generous in our lives? The science, objectivity, something concrete. In fact, in the book, The Paradox of Generosity, it says the key question is this: is greater generosity measured in various ways, positively associated with greater well-being? The clear and consistent answer is yes. 100% yes. So this whole series, I've been very upfront and honest. Certainly, I want you to invest in the vision and mission of Northpoint. There are great things that are happening, and financially to fuel that, to go further, faster, is an awesome, awesome thing. But greater than that, this whole series, I do want what science says, is that I want you to take a step and experience this, genuinely just bask in it a little bit, and experience happiness in a new category that you haven't experienced it. I want you to experience meaning and purpose, that you truly do wake up in the mornings and go like, man, I have more meaning than I ever have. And it's not some kind of emotional little fly-by-the-night kind of thing. No, it's real. I want you to have hope for the future. When depression comes kind of rushing in and you feel that there's something that competes with that. I want you to experience physical health, and I want you to look back 5, 10, 15 years on your life and go, man, I love the direction. I love what my life has become. There are a lot of factors involved in that. But from science and from the ancients, one of the primary factors that allow us to take a step into that is to be more generous. To be more generous. To be more generous. How? Well, here's how. Follow it, observe it, adjust it. Follow it, observe it, adjust it. Follow it, observe it, and then make that adjustment. Let me pray for us. Father, thanks so much for this moment that we can have conversations like this that certainly are not emotionally neutral. And you know that. Father, you know where all of us are at financially. You know where our hearts and our minds are at when it comes to money and generosity. You know the real roadblocks. You know the real obstacles. And you know which ones that certainly need to be overcome. So, Father, I just pray that you tangibly meet all of us exactly where we're at. Love us where we're at. But, Father, don't leave us here. I pray that you give us something bold and courageous to take a step into, and to trust you, and to see the fruit of that trust. God, I pray that for all of us, and you're big enough to handle all that. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.